Hey Bookaholics, so welcome back to another video. Today I am bringing you another standalone batch reviews. I have been doing these since last year because I didn't have somewhere to reference back if I talk about a standalone in terms of my review. It's too much work to keep going through all of my TBRs and wrap-ups and vlogs. So I wanted to have a place where I could reference you, like I do with my series, to my standalones. So I've been doing them in batches of 5 and I have been doing them by theme. I still have so many to get through that I feel like the theme thing is going to be sticking around for a while. But the end goal is that I will get to a point that I've caught up with myself, and then it would just be whichever 5 I have read most recently. But for now, as we're on a theme, we're going to go with humor. These are ones that are in some way satire or humorous, and they're not necessarily funny, but they are ones that have a humorous component in some way, shape, or form. The first one I'm going to talk about today is Sensibility and Sea Monsters. This is a quirk classic that is a retelling of Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. It uses the original text from the novel, but is metamorphosized by author Ben H. Winters into a new story, which is the same narrative, but with sea monsters. I did do a review of Pride, Prejudice and Zombies, which I will leave linked somewhere, of a similar nature. And this is literally the story of Sense and Sensibility. We do have Colonel Brandon he is a man monster. He has been cursed. And we do also have a lot of, well, suitors that are actually monstrous, and it's a horror-ish, fantasy-ish, hilarious retelling. It's not funny in the sense that it's got any kind of haha moments. It's more just the absolute absurdity of taking the actual words that Jane Austen wrote and changing them into this parody style. That is the fun element of these. I had a great time with this. Sense and Sensibility is one of my absolute favorite novels of all time. Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice and Emma are literally some of my all-time favorite stories. So having this like fun retelling using those words that I've read so many times and changing them up was just so much fun to read. I love this story, but obviously it's not one that I am reading because I really want to read this novel, and more just I wanted to see what the author did with it, and I think it really did fulfill that. Now, if you are someone who is quite purist with your reading, which I can completely understand, if you don't want someone taking something you love and changing it, then this is not going to be for you. If you are someone who isn't normally into classics and would find this a fun way of getting into them, you still get the exact same story, barring obviously a couple of changes that are made to make it sea monstery. It could be a good way of consuming the literature without actually having to, especially since, as I said, it does use the actual original text. So you are still consuming a certain degree of Jane Austen through reading this, but you might find it more entertaining. So while I had a great time with it, I can understand that it won't land for everyone, but it could be a fun foray into Jane Austen if it's something you've been hesitant about. The next one I'm going to talk about today is Nettle Bone by T. Kingfisher. This is one that it was, I think, my first foray into T. Kingfisher's traditionally published stuff. I had read The Raven and the Reindeer, which I liked, but it wasn't like the best thing I've ever read. And then I read Nettle and Bone. I buddy read this with my friend Eleanor. I had a wonderful reading experience, which always adds, I think, to your feelings in regards to the book. And then on top of that, it was funny, it was absurd, it was random, but it was also, it has so much heart and so much feeling. It's an interesting way that T. Kingfisher manages to tackle these really serious topics like domestic violence, coupled with humor and levity and this fairy tale whimsy. This is the story of a young woman who comes from a coastal kingdom that is trying to make an alliance with a much larger kingdom to avoid any threat of war. So the eldest daughter is married off to the crown prince. However, not long into their marriage, she shows up dead. So then the next daughter is sent off to also go marry this prince to solidify the alliance. And the youngest daughter is sent to a nunnery because obviously she cannot get married or have children before the prince and his wife do, because otherwise there would be issues in regards to their children who has more rightful claim to the kingdom. So we are following our protagonist as she goes to visit her sister when she is finally giving birth, only to find out that her sister is being treated very, very badly by this prince. So she is determined to not let him kill another one of her sisters. So she goes and seeks out the help of several companions to help her bring down this prince without it affecting her kingdom. We have her going to this old wise woman who basically gives her 3 impossible tasks, and if she completes them, she will get her assistance. We end up with a whole fellowship of people, all misfits of society, people who normally you would not consider to be the heroes of a story, all banding together, and it was absolutely stunning. I just loved the interactions between all of these characters, the friendships that are formed along the way, all on the backdrop of this really epic fantasy setting with this very traumatic subject matter, with a light and humorous writing style, all with fairy tale vibes. So many amazing things coupled together in one story to make for one of my favourite books of last year. It actually would have been on my list had I not loved another T. Kingfisher book slightly more. The next one I'm going to talk about is an odd one, and that is Masters of Death by Olivia Blake. This is one that I had a very peculiar time with. The synopsis of this one alone is very bizarre, because in this story we are following a group of people who are immortal beings. We have a vampire who is trying to sell a haunted house, and since it is haunted, she's having trouble selling it, so she decides to hire a medium to help exorcise the house. However, he actually is a fraud, but you wouldn't think he's a fraud because he is in fact the godson of death. We have werewolves, we have vampires, we have death, we have so many things going on in this story, so many paranormal creatures that we see a lot, and it's in a contemporary setting. It has contemporary vibes. The comedy of this one is more just everything that can go wrong will go wrong in certain situations, and we just have all of these immortal beings who are dealing with essentially an existential crisis, and I think that it was handled in such a fascinating way. Now, I don't feel hugely strongly about the book. It's not like, oh my god, this is an amazing book, it will stay with me, but I had a really good time reading it and a really good experience with it. So it's an odd one because I don't really know exactly where I fall on it, because it's not a new favourite, but it's also one I would highly recommend. Likewise, I also can understand that it's not going to be for everyone, because there is a certain aspect to it that from the synopsis you wouldn't really get necessarily. It doesn't feel like the back really is telling you exactly the feel of this book, but I would highly recommend checking it out if you're wanting just kind of questions on life and that typical thing that you would normally get from contemporary literature, of just questioning what you're doing with your life and your purpose, and all of those things that I think were handled in a really interesting way through these almost immortal beings. The next one I have is one that, though it wasn't necessarily a new favourite for me personally, I can completely understand why people would adore this, and that is Blackwater Sister by Zen Cho. This is one that, synopsis wise, absolutely amazing, and it's not even necessarily that the book doesn't live up to the synopsis. I just expected a different type of humor, I suppose, than the one I got. But this is the story of a young woman who is of Asian heritage but has grown up in America, and her family are very traditionalist, but she's not really got any contact with her heritage because she's never been there. So all of her heritage is literally just from what her parents have shown her in the US. So she is now going to have to return back to her parents' country of origin, somewhere she's not really been. And once she is there, she actually gets possessed by the ghost of her grandmother, because her grandmother promised revenge on this man who has insulted her goddess, who is known as the Blackwater Sister. So this is a story that I really expected to have like way more banter almost between the granddaughter and the grandmother, and it's not that there isn't, it just wasn't the type of banter I was expecting. I think I just went in with like very, very specific expectations, and obviously the book didn't pull through on that, and therefore it kind of tampered with my experience. But I do think that it is the kind of book that would really work really well for other people. The mythology side to it, the cultural side to it, the discussions around being diasporic and feeling from neither here nor there really did resonate with me. It always does, because I'm British, but I have grown up in Spain, and the whole idea of me feeling too English to be Spanish and too Spanish to be English. I kind of understand that whenever I read that in diaspora. I appreciate it's not the same because it's not like a racial issue. It's not a huge cultural shift, but it is still something that I can at least resonate with. I think that it's an interesting approach to it in this story. This girl almost learning about her heritage and her people through this slightly maniacal grandmother that she has. So there are so many things to love about it. It just didn't quite resonate with me in the way that I wanted it to. And the very last one I have to talk about today is The Princess Bride by William Goldman. Now this is of course a much older story. This book itself came out in 1973 with the movie coming out I think in the early 80s. I love the movie. It's one of my favorite kind of older classic films, so naturally I wanted to read the book. I actually think that the film is slightly better just because it does suit having a visual medium and having that where you have the grandfather telling the story to the grandson, etc. But I had such a fun time with it. I love the characters. I love Inigo especially, but obviously Dread Pirate Roberts, and we also have Buttercup, who is a little bit damsel in distressy, but you know, I think that it's always such a fun story to get through. I had a lovely time reliving this story through a different medium. So even though I prefer the film, I'm still really glad that I read the book. It's absolutely hilarious. It's so much fun. This is 100% my kind of humor because of the type of satire that it is as well. So all in all, it worked really well for me. This is the story of Buttercup. She is a young maiden who has a farmhand who works for her named Wesley, and he is in love with her and she is in love with him, but he cannot afford to marry her. So he leaves to go seek out his fortune and promises to return. As the years go by, this prince that is in love with her begins to pressure her to marry him instead. So when she decides that she's waited long enough and assumes that Wesley's not coming back, she agrees to marry this prince, only to find that Wesley does in fact return in a slightly different form. And then yeah, it's a whole load of action scenes and fun moments, and obviously some of the scenes that get glossed over a little bit in the film for the sake of time are filled out more in here, so that's lovely because you get to see a little bit more of interaction between characters, a little bit more of the world, which you only briefly really see in the film. So lots of fun happening, but I also would highly recommend you check out both the film and the book because they're both phenomenal, but they both give you something different. And there you have it. Those are 5 humorous kind of, I suppose, is the best category I could give them, humorous standalones that I would recommend you check out. And yeah, let me know if you've read any of these and your thoughts on them. While you're down there, based on my liking of these books, let me know if there are any that you think that I would enjoy. That is all for me for today, so thank you ever so much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you in another one soon. Bye!